Concrete. Why do I have a picture of a brownie there? Well, I always say mixing concrete and working with concrete is kind of like baking a brownie. How so? When you're baking a brownie, you have to mix up certain ingredients in the proper proportions. You have several ingredients. You might have water, sugar, cocoa, flour, and probably other things that I'm missing. Those all have to be in the proper proportion, otherwise your brownies aren't going to come out too well. And just like that, just like baking a brownie, concrete has ingredients too that we need to put in the proper proportion. Some of our ingredients for concrete would be rocks, cement, and water. We could add in nuts to our brownies, just like concrete. We can add in special things. We could add in different colors, different chemicals to um, speed up the process or slow the process down. And we call those admixtures. And then what you do is you take your brownie mix and you put it in a baking pan and you bake it at a certain temperature for a certain time. In concrete, we would take our mix and we would put it in a form or a mold, and we have to let that cure for a certain amount of time in certain conditions. So that's why I say um, mixing concrete and working with concrete is analogous to making brownies. So people who work with concrete blocks, bricks, stones, and concrete, that general field is called masonry. So a person that does that is a mason. Sometimes it's more specific. It's a bricklayer or stone mason or a brick mason. But in the picture in the bottom right hand corner, we have a carpenter who's building the form or the mold. So the carpenter's creating the form or the mold, and then the mason would come and mix the concrete and put the concrete in the form and finish it off. So what is concrete? Concrete is just an amazing building product, right? When we mix it up, it's in a semi-liquid form, so it'll go in all kinds of different shapes. We can make different kind of molds and forms and just make really cool shapes. And when it cures, it's hard as a rock, right? And so it's going to be there a long time. It shouldn't rot out. We got some great examples here. We got the egg down to the Empire State Plaza, the South Mall. Really neat shape, and that's made out of concrete. Top middle picture is a picnic table with benches, and they have some nice tile inlay on the top. Super heavy. Nobody's going to steal that thing, and it's not going to rot out in a couple of years. Not like maybe regular wood. Top right hand picture is a kitchen counter. Some people might be familiar with like stone countertops, like a granite countertop or a quartz countertop. That's where they're taking big chunks of rock from the ground and they're cutting it up and they're polishing it. What you can do with concrete is you can build your form, you mix your concrete up, and then what you can do is you can polish it. You can make it super smooth and shiny. The bottom picture is the Hoover Dam. And I know at some point in everybody's life, they're going to end up in Las Vegas. So if you're ever in Las Vegas, you have to take my advice and you need to go see the Hoover Dam. It's a pretty short bus trip ride, tour bus ride from Las Vegas down to the Hoover Dam. When you're there, you'll see there's all kinds of bus trips out there. And so you'll go down, you'll check out that Hoover Dam. You get to go inside the Hoover Dam, see the hydro turbines, or they're making electricity for Las Vegas. And so that right there is the top of the Hoover Dam was a road up until not too long ago. That was the main road between Arizona and Nevada. So you could drive across that Hoover Dam. Now you can just walk across it. So not too long ago, they built a bridge in front of there, and that is the Pat Tillman Bridge. Does anybody know who Pat Tillman is? Another example of concrete is Hudson Valley's concrete canoe. So that canoe is made out of concrete. What do you think they had to do to make that concrete canoe float? This is a picture that it's not taken from too far from here. It is Loch 9 in Rotterdam. So when they lower the Mohawk River, aka the Barge Canal, aka the Erie Canal, when they lower the river in the wintertime, this is what you see. They have these concrete barges, and so they were built during World War II to transport goods across the state. So at the time, they built them out of concrete because it was cheaper and quicker than using steel or wood. They ran into a problem though, is that they only lasted about 5 years. So these barges, they were actually scuttled, means they sank them on purpose. You can see they're all kind of lined up, and what they do now is they're acting like kind of anchors. And when the river is full, most of it is below the water line, but those squares on top will be sticking up, so you can actually tie up to the barge, and your vessel will not go anyplace. So now we get to the ingredients. The main ingredient, the secret ingredient to concrete is Portland cement. So Portland cement is made from limestone, which is a rock. What they do is they grind up that rock really small, and they heat it up in a kiln, and it takes lots of energy to do that. So this is not necessarily a green building product because it takes so much energy to make the cement, and it also gives off some potential toxins. You can see in the picture of RCS High School not far from here, and in the background is the Lafarge cement plant, and you can see that big tall smokestack in the background. And so there's always been a little bit of controversy with our neighbors in Western Massachusetts, say like Pittsfield or where Jiminy Peak ski area is, because what happens is the winds are always blowing that way, and so if there's any toxins coming out of that smokestack, they kind of land in Western Massachusetts. And if you're traveling down the New York State Thruway, say you're heading to New York City, around RCS High School there, you'll come across some kind of weird structure that the thruway goes over. It's this long, skinny structure. It seems to go on for miles. It's a covered conveyor, and what they're doing is they're mining the limestone, and you need to get the limestone to the plant. And so instead of using trucks, they have this big, huge covered conveyor belt. Sometimes the ingredients for concrete call for a bag of Portland cement. And if you look down on the bag, you'll see that the bag weighs 94 pounds. Kind of a weird number, but that's part of the ingredients, is that when you have the recipe and it calls for a bag, it's really calling for 94 pounds of Portland cement. The next ingredient for concrete is water. So water makes the chemical reaction take place. Okay, so that chemical reaction is called hydration, and it's really important how much water you put in the concrete. So if you put in a lot of water, it makes it easy to mix the concrete. It makes it easy to place the concrete, right? But a lot of water makes the concrete weak. So there's a certain amount of water that you can have. The chart below, I know it's hard to see, but as you add water, the concrete gets weaker. However, it's easier to work with. So a lot of times, masons or anybody who's working with concrete, you'll like a lot of water in it because it's easy to work with. However, the concrete's not going to be as strong, right? So when you get concrete on a job site, what you do is you have to mix the concrete up according to the recipe. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it's like a megaphone. So maybe like an old-time cheerleader would use. You have this megaphone. What you do is you fill that metal megaphone up with concrete, and then you tip it upside down and you take the megaphone off, and you're left with this kind of big lump of concrete, kind of like building a sandcastle at the beach. You'd put some wet sand in your bucket, and then you turn the bucket upside down and try and get the bucket off, and hopefully you have a big lump of sand when you're done. So what they're doing in that picture is they're measuring the slump. So don't forget, we filled up that cone. So when the metal cone was taken off, because there was water in there, it slumped over. It got smaller. And so what they're looking for there is that you can't have a slump greater than 6 inches when you're working with that concrete. So that's the test that you would do on site right when you're ready to pour the concrete. You got to make sure that the concrete is good before you place it. The next ingredient is what we call aggregate. So this could be sand and stone or gravel, depending on what area of the country you're in, and according to the strength that you want of your concrete. So this makes up 60 to 80% of the volume of the concrete. So this is the biggest and most ingredient of concrete is aggregate. And like I said before, when you're making brownies, you could add walnuts to the mix to make your brownies a little more interesting. And again, you can add different things to concrete recipes. The picture right there, you can see they added color. So all those things are what we call admixtures. All right, and then what happens down the bottom there is something called air entraining cement. What you can do is you can add something in there, an extra ingredient, so it creates tiny little air bubbles, tiny little pockets in the cement when it's curing. And so hopefully when it freezes and thaws and the concrete expands and contracts, it's got a little more room to expand and contract, and it won't crack. Ooh, that's a scary looking problem from chemistry. Well, that is the chemical reaction that's taking place, the hydration chemical reaction in the curing of concrete. So the only thing that I really know about this is that it's an exothermic reaction. So if you have, when you're pouring concrete and you have a big area of volume of concrete you're doing, you can almost feel the heat coming off of it. So it's giving off heat. So after you have everything mixed up and you put it in the mold or the form, we'll call it the baking process is really the curing process. So the concrete has to cure. So when you first do concrete, within hours you could probably walk on the concrete. You'll see when you do your concrete that it has a slight color to it, a little tint of green, maybe for the first day or two. And that's a sure sign that there's still moisture in there, and so it's still kind of drying out, still kind of curing. And then you can see that it takes almost 28 days for it to reach its 90% of its strength. Again, there's a picture of the Hoover Dam down there. That was completed in 1935. And in 1995, they took core samples of this dam, and they realized that the inside of the dam, that concrete is still curing. And if it's curing, it's just still getting stronger, stronger, and stronger. So when you're curing the concrete, the water is kind of our secret ingredient to activating the chemical reaction. So if you don't have the water, you won't have a chemical reaction to cure the concrete and make it hard. So if you're pouring or mixing concrete and placing concrete, say in a hot, sunny day, what you need to do is you need to keep the surface nice and moist. So you can see in the picture down below, they spread out burlap, and then they have somebody with a hose, or you can see what maybe sometimes a water sprinkler. And they're just keeping that wet for a couple days to make sure that it cures properly. If it's going to be really windy, sometimes you have to cover it up and shield it from the wind and shield it from the sun. So it's all about letting the water do its thing. If the water's not there, your concrete is not going to cure properly. Here's a picture of curing concrete in the wintertime. You can see the snow all around. So, like I said, you need the water for the chemical reaction. If the water is frozen, it's pretty much like having no water. Okay, so you can't let it freeze for the first couple days, and the first 24 hours. If you have any freeze, the concrete's going to be no good. So there are admixtures that you can put in to shorten the time. If you're getting really cold weather expected, you could speed up the reaction. Or, and like in these pictures here, you can see they built like big tents around it, and they're actually heating that area to keep the concrete warm during the curing process. So concrete is the strength of the concrete is measured in PSI, pounds per square inch. The picture shows concrete test cylinders. If you remember back to our slump test, I said the slump test, when you're ready to say you're building a bridge, before you pour the concrete into the mold or place the concrete into the mold, you would make sure that the concrete has the proper slump. And then what you would do is you would form a couple of these concrete cylinders. And like we said, after 4 days, it's supposed to have a certain strength. And then after 28 days, it's supposed to have a certain strength. So what they do is they take those cylinders and they store them for a couple of days, or they store them for a month, or they store them for longer. And what they do is they put them in that machine in the middle picture. That concrete cylinder is in there, and that machine just pushes down with all its might. And the picture on the right shows the concrete when it fails. And the machine will register how many pounds per square inch it took for it to fail. So if the engineer calls for 2,500 pound concrete on the bridge, and after 28 days, you only get, it only says it's only holding 1,500 pounds, then you have a major problem because the concrete is not as strong as what the engineer said it was supposed to be. So there has to be some kind of resolution. The engineer has to figure out what to do with the concrete. Maybe we can reinforce it, or maybe you have to take it all out and do it over again. Concrete is really super strong in compression. So when you're pushing on concrete, it's really, really strong. But if you're pulling on it, it's not strong at all. So if you think about a bridge, if you have a car parked in the middle of the bridge, well, the car is pushing down on the top of the bridge, and so that's in compression. But the bottom of the bridge is going to want to be stretching, and so that's in tension. So we always have to do, or most of the time have to reinforce concrete with metal. So those reinforced concrete, reinforced bars, those metal bars that we put in concrete is called rebar, for reinforcing bar. Here's some pictures of rebar. So there is a close-up picture of one of those barges in the Mohawk River, and you can kind of see those wires hanging down and kind of all bent over and things like that. That's the rebar. In the top right-hand side, you can see probably a patio or a sidewalk or maybe a garage floor or something like that they're making. You can see what the rebar looks like before they pour the concrete in there. The base is all gravel, so they've got it all set up. They've got their rebar off the gravel, so it's hanging up in the air with those black metal plastic stands. They have all the rebar wired or tied or zip tied together, and so what happens when you pour the concrete, that bar is up in the middle of the concrete slab. You can also do mesh So down the bottom right-hand picture, you can buy mesh like that. And again, you can see that little white, to me, it looks like a king's crown, but that white thing is holding the mesh up off the gravel or the base, and the concrete goes all around it. So the mesh is embedded in the middle of the concrete. Bottom left-hand side, there's a zoomed up picture of the actual rebar itself. You see the rebar has those little ridges on there so that it can't slide or move inside the concrete. Rebar is measured in eighths of an inch. So for instance, if you had a number 6 rebar, that means it's 6/8 of an inch, or we can reduce that to 3/4 of an inch. So how do you measure the amount of concrete? Well, the top left picture is this big cube, and that is 1 cubic yard of concrete. So that means that square there is 1 yard wide, it's 1 yard tall, and 1 yard deep. So that's really 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And in the top right hand picture, you can see that is about 1 cubic yard. You can see compared to a man how much that is. So the bottom picture, that's a picture of mulch, and it says it's 2 cubic yards. So again, we have the man laying there, so you can see how much 2 cubic yards is compared to a real person. And if you've ever done this at home and you've worked with people at home or somebody else to spread mulch in the springtime, you might go to a landscaping supply company and you might say, I want 2 yards of mulch. Well, how do they measure that out? It's in a huge pile. How do they measure it out? So here's a picture of different ways of mixing concrete. Okay, so we've got a couple different options for mixing concrete. The top left-hand picture shows a wheelbarrow or a pan or a little portable concrete mixer. And so what you could do is you could buy bags of ready mixed concrete, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So top right-hand side, the yellow bag of Quikrete. What they've done is they've already mixed the ingredients or combined the ingredients for us. So in that bag is some sand, is some aggregate, some rock, and some cement. And what we do is we just pour it in our bucket and we add the water in, we mix it up, and we can place our concrete then. Bottom left-hand side is a different way of making concrete. You can see we've got a concrete mixer. And in the left-hand side of the picture is a pile of gravel or crushed stone. And over on the right-hand side, beside the man, there's a pallet of bags of cement, and it's covered up with a tarp because you don't want to get that wet. So what you can do is you can mix your own ingredients right on site. If you're doing a bigger job, like a sidewalk or something, you could do this yourself. Or you can call up and you can get it all mixed and delivered in one of those big, huge concrete trucks. So this is going to be important to us. That bag of concrete, they sell that bag of concrete, the ready mixed concrete. That's an 80-pound bag. Well, I had to look it up. So how many cubic feet are in a bag? It is not even 1 cubic foot of concrete in that bag. Think about going back to how we measure concrete in cubic yards, right? So we said a cubic yard is 3 feet times 3 feet times 3 feet. So we got 3 times 3 is 9, 9 times 3 is 27. There's 27 cubic feet in a yard of concrete. There's not even 1 cubic foot in a bag of concrete. It kind of makes a difference when we look at if we want to make a 10 foot by 10 foot by 4 inch thick patio. we do the math, we need 57 bags. We only need a yard and a quarter of concrete, but it would take 57 bags of the Quikrete Ready Mix. Okay, think about that. Each one weighs 80 pounds. So when you go to, say, Lowe's to buy your concrete, you have to pick up 57 bags and you put it on your cart. You have to make multiple trips. Then you get out to your truck and you have to pick up the bag again and put it in the back of your truck. And then when you get home, you probably have to take the bags and unload it from the truck. And then what you need to do is you need to mix all that stuff up. So if we multiply 57 times 80, that's 4,560 pounds you move each time. So you're potentially moving that 3 times. So that's a huge amount of work. So you might be better off getting the concrete delivered. All right. So when you're getting concrete delivered, it must be delivered within an hour and a half after they put the water in. Right? Not that big of a deal, you think. But what happens if you are building building a skyscraper in New York City? There's not a lot of concrete plants in downtown Manhattan, so the concrete truck might have to come from New Jersey. It might get stuck in the bridge in traffic. So you really only have not that long a time to pour that concrete. So that big truck that I was showing you, that can deliver 1 to 10 yards at a time. So just to give you a little example on prices, I don't know how up to date they are, but so that means a full load of that truck would cost over $1,000. Okay. If you're getting a truck, you probably have to order at least 6 yards. If you don't have a full load of like 6 yards, they're going to charge you extra money for just using the truck. And then when the truck is at your job site, you get about 5 minutes to unload each yard. So if you had a full load of 10 yards, that's about 50 minutes. If you go over that amount of time, they could actually charge you extra also. So how do you get the concrete in the right place? We talk about how much it weighs. It's a huge amount of weight, right? So you don't want to be moving concrete by hand. The top left picture shows the concrete truck with a big chute, so they can control that chute and they can place the concrete where you want it. You could get a concrete pumper, and what happens, you put the concrete in a pumper and it's got a hose coming out of it, and what you can do is you can really place the concrete exactly where you want it. But if you look at these two guys that are holding up that hose, that hose weighs hundreds of pounds because it's full of concrete. And if you're doing a really big job, you can get a concrete pump truck that looks like this. It looks like a big crane, and they could reach over a building and put the concrete right where you want it. But that all costs money. You have to rent the crane for the day and make sure that the concrete goes where it's supposed to go. Okay, once you have the concrete in the form, okay, I always think of this as like if you had like a bowl full of jelly beans. What you do is you have a bowl and you fill it up with jelly beans, and you just leave it there. What happens when you shake the bowl? The jelly beans all kind of settle in, and the level of jelly beans would go down in the bowl. And that's kind of what we want to do with the concrete. They have different words for it, but you can see in this picture here, right, the concrete, we've got all these voids, okay, and that's not good. So what we need to do is we need to vibrate it, we tap it, we spade it, we screed it. So it's just kind of like shaking up the concrete a little bit to make it settle and to make it flow. In the middle picture, this is a vibrator, and so you just stick it in here and it vibrates, and the concrete all kind of just flows around it. We'll be doing this, except our job's a lot smaller, so we'll just use a Sawzall without the blade on it to vibrate our mold. And up here this is what we call screeding. So what you're doing is just running a board back and forth, back and forth. It kind of makes the top smooth and liquidy, and you're pushing the excess concrete. You're pushing this excess concrete forward here. So we have a nice smooth shape when we're done. All right, safety. Concrete weighs a lot. Those bags that we're going to be using, they weigh 80 pounds a piece. So you got to be careful when you're lifting concrete. Top right-hand picture shows to lift with your legs and not with your back. When you're building molds or forms, you got to be really careful that they're strong enough so that they don't blow out while you're pouring the concrete. So up here in the top left-hand side, you can see a picture of a mold that's starting to fail. The concrete is coming out the bottom, and so this is going to be a big mess for somebody. Bottom right-hand picture, here's another picture of some forms. You can see all the wood that they used to make the form and to brace the form, because they're adding a ton of weight in here. If this ever failed, it would just knock these guys over and bury them in concrete. And while we're talking about safety, a lot of times when you're doing concrete, it's below the ground, below grade. And so anytime you're digging a hole, you can't get in a hole that is deeper than your waist. Okay, that's kind of one of our rules, safety rules in general. Because if there's a cave in, it would trap you down in the hole. So what they've got here, this is obviously deeper. This is over this worker's head, and so what they did is they put a trench box in. So they dug the hole and they put this big, huge metal reinforced box in there so that the worker can work safely down in the hole. All right, more safety with concrete. Concrete, the cement, it's a really super fine dust, and you'll see it's really light. It just floats all over the place, and this dust is definitely not good to breathe. Okay, so when you're working with concrete, you should be wearing some kind of dust mask. You can see this gentleman there is wearing the hard hat and the dust mask. A lot of times they wet it down so that you don't get that dust flying all over the place. But working with concrete, especially long-term exposure to concrete, you definitely want to protect your lungs. And concrete, you're going to find is, first of all, it's abrasive. It's got rocks in there and sand, and think about sandpaper. If you are constantly rubbing against sandpaper, it wears out your skin. So the same thing can happen with concrete. I've done it before where I've used low-cut boots. You get a little concrete in the top of your boot, and it's just rubbing back and forth all day. It'll cause a blister. It can also just dry your skin right out. It'll suck the moisture right out of your skin, just like in the wintertime. You know how in the wintertime your skin gets dry and your hands kind of crack a little bit? Well, that could also happen if you're around concrete. That picture in the bottom right-hand side, those are concrete burns. So that was somebody that's been working with concrete a lot, and it just dried all the moisture out of their skin and actually burnt their skin. And that's all I have for concrete. We've got a couple pictures here. I showed you the Concrete Canoe Club at Hudson Valley Community College. These are just some pictures. This one's different. When you go to college, there's different kind of cool clubs that you can join. One being the Concrete Canoe Club. This is Clarkson. They were working on a clean burning snowmobile. This might be Hudson Valley. I'm not sure, but this is a bridge competition. So they had a design and build this bridge. This is a Formula SAE car, and this is their Formula off-road kind of dune buggy kind of competition. So something to look forward to if you're going to college. You can join these cool clubs.